Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the single most destructive and transformational event in human history, World War II. Between 1939 and 1945, this wasn't just a war, it was a total global upheaval that engulfed virtually every inhabited continent. It completely revolutionized warfare, politics, economics, and international relations. By the end of our time together, you'll see exactly how this monumental struggle completely redrew the map and laid the complex foundations of the modern world we live in right now. 70 to 85 million. Let that number sink in for a second. Before we get into military strategy, shifting borders, or technological leaps, we have to ground ourselves in the sheer human cost. Between 70 and 85 million people perished. That includes soldiers who fell in battle and tens of millions of civilians who were caught in the crossfire, displaced, or systematically targeted. Entire cities were leveled. Societies were permanently altered. This staggering number is the terrifying reality of what happens when the entire world mobilizes for total war. To map out this journey from the initial spark of the conflict to the birth of the modern world, we'll hit 5 key areas: origins and opposing alliances, the Axis surge, the turning tide, victory and the human cost, and finally, the post-war world order. Let's get into it. Part 1. Origins and opposing alliances. So, born out of the unresolved baggage of World War I, the harshness of the Treaty of Versailles, and the crushing economic weight of the Great Depression, the globe fractured. It basically split into 2 massive camps. On one side, you had the Axis powers, primarily Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and the Empire of Japan. These nations were laser-focused on aggressive territorial expansion and regional dominance, totally convinced that military conquest was the only key to their survival. Standing against them were the Allied powers. Initially led by the UK and France, this eventually morphed into a massive coalition that included the United States, the Soviet Union, and China. Now, these nations had vastly different political systems, but they united around one single goal: stopping Axis aggression by mobilizing resources on a scale the world had never seen before. Part 2. The Axis surge. When diplomacy finally broke down in 1939, the world was just completely blindsided by the speed of the Axis powers, especially Germany. And the engine behind that terrifying momentum? Blitzkrieg. Literally, lightning war. This wasn't the slow, grinding, muddy trench warfare of World War I. Blitzkrieg completely bypassed that by combining fast-moving tanks, highly coordinated aircraft strikes, and mechanized infantry to just overwhelm opponents before they could even react. It was this specific tactical evolution that led to the shockingly rapid fall of Western Europe in just a matter of months. The escalation was just relentless. In September 1939, Germany unleashes this blitzkrieg on Poland, officially kicking things off. By 1940, nations like Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and incredibly, France had collapsed under the German advance. Then, June 1941 hits, and Germany launches Operation Barbarossa, literally the largest land invasion in human history, pushing deep into the Soviet Union. And finally, in December 1941, Japan launches a surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. Just like that, the United States is pulled into the fray, and the conflict explodes from a regional European war into a truly global struggle. So, by the end of 1941, you have the Axis controlling vast stretches of Europe, North Africa, and Asia. They look completely invincible. Which brings us to the big question. How do you actually halt an unstoppable war machine? What does it take to reverse the momentum of a military force that has essentially conquered half the globe? Part 3. The turning tide. Well, 1942 and 1943 proved that this momentum wasn't permanent. Stretched way too thin and fighting severe supply shortages, the Axis ran into a newly energized Allied resistance across multiple, interconnected battlegrounds. Up in the skies over the UK, the Battle of Britain handed Hitler his first major strategic failure. Over on the Eastern Front, the absolute meat grinder that was the Battle of Stalingrad ended with the destruction of Germany's 6th Army, permanently shattering that myth of German invincibility. Meanwhile, out in the Pacific, the United States destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers at the Battle of Midway, immediately shifting naval superiority. And down in North Africa, the Allied victory at El Alamein effectively ended Axis ambitions on the continent. Every single theater played a crucial role in halting the advance. But it wasn't just troops on the ground shifting the momentum. It was a war of the mind, too. While the fighting raged on the front lines, a massive top-secret effort was happening in the realm of intelligence. British cryptanalysts, including the legendary mathematician Alan Turing, achieved a monumental breakthrough by cracking Germany's highly sophisticated Enigma encryption system. This let Allied commanders intercept critical German communications and literally anticipate their moves. It really goes to show how scientific innovation and macro-level intelligence played just as crucial a role in winning the war as tanks and airplanes.
Part 4. Victory and the Human Cost.
Pushing back the Axis was a brutal, grinding slog that took years of intense sacrifice. It demanded an unprecedented scale of mobilization. We're talking over 17 million personnel serving in armed forces worldwide. The sheer logistics of that are honestly mind-boggling, and we have to recognize just how global this mobilization really was. For example, British India made an absolutely massive contribution, providing more than 2.5 million soldiers to the Allied effort. That was the largest volunteer army in human history, and those Indian troops were absolutely vital in victories across North Africa, Italy, and Southeast Asia. And this massive mobilization built toward a final multinational push for victory. In June 1944, the Allies launched D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in military history, establishing a crucial Western front in France. Caught in a vice between the Western Allies and the Soviet forces pushing from the east, Germany finally collapsed, surrendering in May 1945. But the war was still raging in the Pacific. To force an end to the brutal island warfare, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. Days later, Japan surrendered, formally ending the conflict in September. But as Allied forces advanced, they uncovered terrifying realities about the true nature of the regimes they had just defeated. Under Nazi ideology, the German state implemented a systematic, industrialized program of persecution and extermination. This state-sponsored mass murder claimed the lives of approximately 6 million Jews, alongside millions of other victims targeted for their ethnicity, disabilities, political beliefs, or orientation. The Holocaust remains one of history's most devastating examples of genocide, a permanent and tragic scar on humanity.
Part 5. The Post-War World Order.
So, the war finally ends, but the world is virtually unrecognizable. Cities aren't ruins, empires are crippled, and the global balance of power has completely shifted. Determined to stop a catastrophe of this scale from ever happening again, world leaders put massive structural changes in place. In 1945, they created the United Nations to promote diplomacy and collective security. To ensure international accountability for the atrocities we just talked about, leading Nazi officials were prosecuted at the Nuremberg trials, setting a massive precedent for international law. On top of that, the war severely weakened traditional European empires, which rapidly accelerated decolonization and independence movements across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, entirely reshaping the global map. But here's the catch. Once the common enemy was defeated, the Allied alliance immediately fractured. Almost overnight, the post-war world divided into two ideological superpowers. On one side, you had the US-led Western Bloc, defined by liberal democracy and a capitalist economy. On the other, the Soviet-led Eastern Bloc, defined by communist political systems and state-controlled economies. This deep ideological divide, backed by heavily armed military alliances like NATO and the Warsaw Pact, sparked the decades-long geopolitical standoff that we know as the Cold War. And that really brings us to the ultimate paradox of this incredible conflict. Defeating fascism literally saved the free world from totalitarian expansion. Yet, the very technological innovation required to win that war, the creation of the atomic bomb, ushered humanity right into a new era where global destruction was just a button press away. We defeated one terrifying existential threat, only to give birth to the looming specter of nuclear annihilation. It really leaves us to wonder, did the victory that saved the modern world also create the weapons that could eventually end it? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.